The twins arrived home to their seaside country mansion. The zest of the ocean blessed their cheeks and salted their lips. After another job well done, it was good to be home. Darby dropped his coat onto the foyer floor while Digby lit a cigarette inside the house. For the first time in 3 weeks, the boys could finally relax. Their previous investigation proved to be quite mentally taxing. Darby had begun to bite his nails due to the anxiety, and Digby's chain smoking got worse. As they vanished into the house with the sounds of their singing voices tapering off into the hallways, a familiar but always unwelcome figure lurched through the door with their suitcases. Digby walked back to the front room to fetch some tribal necklaces he stole to impress the local girls. There, he was assaulted by the vision of the figure that held his belongings. The mere sight was an affront to the pleasant ideals that Digby had for the rest of his afternoon. "Mugsley, you pathetic ogre! I thought I told you to enter through the back door. I had witnessed far too many unpleasant things in my previous case. The last image I needed to see today was your face." Conrad Mugsley was a giant of a man, severe in all ways. He was of an indeterminate old age and looked decrepit. However, his physical strength was visible due to the size and length of his arms and legs. His unblinking, almost yellow eyes created a sickly glow that was unmistakable in low light. The wide-brimmed hat he wore cast a merciful shadow on his grisly features. He was once a pale man, but due to years of sunburnt servitude to the Dagwood family, the pigment of his flesh matched the darkness of the dry, rotten wood that he would soon be ordered to replace on the outer features of the mansion. He was the brunt of the Dagwood Brothers' cruel fun. Darby returned from his room and joined his brother and servant in the lobby. He had gotten dressed in his personalized bathrobe, emblazoned with his initials. Despite him having the same initials as his brother, he always knew which bathrobe was his. He kept his belongings clean, unlike his brother, who would often come back caked in dirt, blood, or other strange fluids. Digby immediately noticed his brother about to get comfortable and began his usual disruption of this as only he could. Sat on the couch, Digby tipped the plate of cakes that sat on the coffee table off onto the floor with the tip of his filthy bare toe. The fine china plate shattered, sending tiny white shards all over the carpet and under the couches, sure to become embedded in the fine thread. All Mugsley could do was stare briefly and speed up his retrieval of the boys' suitcases. "What the bloody hell is the matter with you, Digby?" "Shut the fuck up, Darby, you idiot." Darby was smart enough to know when his twin brother wanted to fight and would often leave these situations alone. But on the day they returned from an exhausting trip to the Himalayas, he could not resist the urge to bite back. "Say, Digby, I saw Mary Marie Trenton on the drive back here. She looked rather fetching, I must say." "Careful, fool," said Digby, his toenails audibly digging into the already frayed threading of the couch. "I gave her a little wave while we drove past. I could practically see her cotton socks become drenched as she looked back at me." "You ugly, insolent predator!" Digby leapt off the couch in a matter of seconds as he pounced at his brother, his fragile ego once again getting the better of him. Before Digby could lay a hand on Darby, Mugsley caught his shirt collar in midair and sent him flung backwards onto the couch. "No fighting, boys," said the gray giant. "Why don't you mind your own business, you old bastard?" said Darby with an almost visible smug grin on his face. Digby shot an icy stare back at Darby's eye as he fixed his shirt. He stood up, collecting shards of broken china in the flesh of his foot. Being barefoot most of the time, he could barely feel it. "I'm going to my room. Mugsley, find the necklaces and leave them outside my door." Mugsley barely registered the order as he went back for more bags. Despite his decades of experience as the family steward, he could get tired, too. As he saw Digby's feet stamp bloody heel-shaped stains on their floor, Darby took as deep a breath as he could and lay on the couch. The weight of his face stifled his breathing, but appreciating the silence, he did not care. The Dagwood brothers were amateur detectives and adventurers and had become quite notorious for their daring exploits. Despite being only 15 years of age, the boys were known for solving many local and international mysteries. They discovered buried treasure, found missing people, and overthrew corrupt politicians. The Dagwood brothers were absolute darlings of international media. They had just finished retrieving a sacred jewel that was stolen from a village full of kind, hard-working people in the Himalayas. A corrupt trader named Michael Rand had taken it with the intent to sell it to a local group of snow pirates. This village was made up of snow guides that helped foreigners witness the beauty and avoid the danger that was the Himalayas while asking for nothing in return, not even a small fee. After the Dagwood brothers heard of the theft, they knew they could not let the indignation of a proud people stand. They were champions of culture and had read of the villagers in their family archives. What followed was an incredible adventure that saw the boys defeating evil and returning a sacred item back to its people. At least that's what the tabloids said. The true events of the Dagwood brothers' campaign across the Himalayas were much grislier. It absolutely could not go into print. The families across the world that read their exploits in the newspapers to their children wouldn't be able to stomach what really happened. The Dagwoods were an inspiration. As parents tucked their children to sleep, they would tell them stories of the brothers' adventures. If a child were unruly, they would be reminded that the Dagwoods would never behave improperly. If a child had refused to eat their vegetables, their parents would state that Digby and Darby had eaten 3 whole plates of green beans before they found the Lindbergh baby alive and well. Thus, the true events of the Dagwoods' adventures were always shrouded behind an incredibly bespoke web of marketing campaigns and lies told to the general public. It's easy to sell the story of wealthy twin brother detectives with a genteel upbringing and the support of their respected Uncle Miles Virgil Dagwood, the American silver magnate and politician who won the West and became the best. What was much harder to sell was the story of a 15-year-old boy detective initiating sex with a Nepalese snow pirate and violently dragging a knife from the pirate's scrotum up to his jugular, causing his steaming entrails to drop miserably onto the icy floor of a speeding train. Darby and Digby Dagwood were boy detectives. That much is true. Darby was born with a facial deformity that caused his parents to abuse and sequester him as a child. He was never given any attention by anyone he loved and was treated like a monster by the local children. He would always run away to his Uncle Miles's estate and trap himself in his library, getting lost in all sorts of adventures and learning philosophies, systems, and trades one book at a time. Uncle Miles became fond of Darby, funding his ecstasy of knowledge and massaging the dark streak of relentless pursuit that he hoped would one day produce an heir for his silver mining industry. Miles had no children of his own and saw much of himself in the unsightly Darby. As Darby grew older, he became a boy genius. Eventually, everyone in the town had learned to ignore his grisly facade and knew him to be a local prodigy. The townsfolk conveniently learned to respect Darby after the last child that had dared to bully him drank his chemist father's entire supply of barbiturates. When the body was found days later stinking of mottled flesh and urine, the only things found on his person were a bag of marbles and a carefully folded note that read only 2 words. Sorry, Darby. On the other hand, Digby was always a difficult child. If Darby was the model citizen that their parents always wanted but hated the sight of, Digby was the polar opposite, born a beautiful, perfect specimen, physically healthy in every respect. He was a master of sports at a young age while his brother was hiding his ogreish face in books. Digby was groomed by his parents to be the ultimate athlete, the poster boy for the family name. It wasn't until their mother found him torturing live rats with matches while wearing her brassiere on his head did the family start to get concerned. He had been burning their genitals while charring his own fingertips, seemingly impervious to pain at the young age of 6. Despite their constant fighting, The boys really only had each other and were not shy in their proclamations of love for one another. Darby was the tortured genius with the meatball for a head, while his brother was a disturbed lunatic that got away with most things because of his perfect face. However, their level of fighting was not normal for kids their age and status. In the wake of their parents' deaths by plane crash, the boys went off to live with Miles. After a minor argument that caused Digby to get Darby in trouble with his beloved Uncle Miles, Darby orchestrated a punishment so severe that it would mentally and physically scar him for life. Darby adored his Uncle Miles, so to be scolded by him for any reason was a major blow for the budding genius. To punish Digby for getting him in trouble, Darby manipulated him into shooting their governess in the ear with a blunderbuss, shaving off half her face in a violent but ultimately non-fatal affair. This caused Uncle Miles to retaliate by sending Digby to an incredibly strict youth reform school in Africa, where wealthy families would whisk away their depraved children to learn the simple ways of living while being molded into upstanding citizens. Needless to say, Digby managed to escape and was missing for 3 years. Darby was not bothered one bit by his brother's disappearance, the reason being that he simply believed his deranged brother was invincible. This would prove somewhat true when Mugsley showed up one day with a malnourished Digby. When asked how he survived for 3 years completely alone, Digby would always say, "I fought and fornicated my way through Africa, Europe, Asia, and then I accidentally made it back home to Moreton Bay. Would you happen to have any absinthe?" He was 11 years old when he came back. There was no guilt upon Digby's return for Darby. He simply greeted his skeletal twin brother with a gaudy, unflappable cackling that caused him to roll down the stairs in hysterics. Digby, having learned a lot from his trip through the continents, no longer had the energy to be mad at his manipulative brother. He could only respect his brother for going too far on an elaborate prank. On his little trip, Digby picked up many skills as much as he picked up many diseases. He had also gained a tattoo on his cheek, which caused many socialites to believe that his beautiful visage was ruined and had picked up a habit for chain-smoking unfiltered cigarettes. The Dagwood boys were dangerous. Somehow, print media was able to hide their true nature and spin it into something positive. "Such is the way of capitalism," Uncle Miles said often. As the boys got older and more insufferable, he would avoid seeing them more and more until he became words on a page. Every birthday and Christmas were the only times the boys would hear from their beloved uncle in the form of letters. After their journey to the Himalayas, however, they received an enraged phone call from him, stating his displeasure for having to pay the tabloids extra to take the secrets they had learned about the boys' trip to the Himalayas to their graves. The papers stated that Michael Rand was being held in a freezing Nepalese prison, abseiling off the mountainside as he endlessly scraped ice off the windows for the other prisoners to be able to see the sunrise while he perpetually had his back turned to it. In reality, the end of Michael Rand's story saw him becoming no more than a crumpled stain on the right side of a Himalayan train track. Digby had bitten his nose off while fighting him on top of the main carriage. He threw him off the front, grinding his flesh under the train's snowplow. It was also said that the jewel was returned to its village by the boys unconditionally, and that the day was saved and its people had learned to hope again. In truth, Darby demanded that the village give him all of the money they had in exchange for the jewel. When the sum given was not what he had wanted, Darby threw the jewel into deep snow and left. While this was happening, Digby was caught having sex with the village chief's wife. He blinded the chief by picking up hot coals with his bare hands and flicking them into his eyes. After the boys had escaped, it had taken the villagers 8 weeks to find the jewel under the snow. When it was finally found, it turned out Darby had not thrown it very far from where he stood. It was under everyone's noses. 2 old men froze to death trying to find the sacred stone. The Dagwoods would become present in their nightmares for years. When Mugsley picked the boys up from their private airstrip, He was greeted by two arrogant little monsters who had become bored of the adventuring life for a time. Instead of adventuring without purpose, the Dagwoods decided that they would take an extended stay at home, back in their hometown of Morton Bay. The boys believed they had a good run being detectives for a while. For the coming summer, they would just be boys.